Today, the Democrats in the House released their bill to reform the police, and we are going to give our impressions of what is included, what is not, what we think of it. Francesca, here are some of what the bill includes. Provides federal funding for racial bias training, creates a national misconduct registry for officers to ensure officers with lengthy and questionable records can simply change departments to avoid accountability, and reform qualified immunity laws to make it easier to prosecute police and other government agent misconduct. We're going to stop there for a second. There is more. What's interesting is some of that, we were talking earlier about the John Oliver episode last night. Some of that is what he had been pushing for, like removing the qualified immunity. Some, like the implicit bias training, is like obviously something that we probably approve of, but also at this point, it doesn't appear to be doing almost anything. And so having that as one of the headline inclusions of the bill makes me suspicious right off the bat.
Yeah, you lead with kind of your strongest suit. That doesn't feel strong. It's like, oh, we're gonna watch a video and have a school assembly about how racism exists.
Yeah. There was a tweet. It was one of the MSNBC hosts. I forget exactly which, but said no amount of training has ever turned a bad person into a good person. Effectively about that. And I thought, well, I don't know if that's 100% true, but yeah, probably largely. By the time you, as a police officer, get to this bias training, you're kind of who you are at that point. Maybe it'll make you aware of a few things, but it's certainly, like, these have become more common over the past few years, and it doesn't seem like that has fixed everything.
Right. I mean, what are we talking? Are we talking like ethnic studies, like 4 years, receive a little degree, Are we reading Michelle Alexander's A New Jim Crow? Like, how deep are we going here? Are we like doing some community racial justice organizing, like a little internship, for 6 months before you can be a police officer? These are lists. That's my wish list. But something tells me that that's not part of it.
Yeah, no, I don't think they go just that far just yet. But there is more. Let's continue. Requires state and local law enforcement agencies to report use of force incidents to the Justice Department. Bans chokeholds and no-knock warrants in drug cases at the federal level. Incentivize local departments to adopt similar measures by withholding funding for those that don't. So hypothetically, that last bit obviously is tied into both Floyd and also Taylor, those two cases. And again, there will be a little bit more. Some of these are perfectly fine reforms to make, and maybe you could have been pushing for this, not just as the result of weeks of protest. I would guess that so far what's been included is probably not going to completely reassure many of the people that feel like a far deeper, more structural rebooting of law enforcement in America is necessary. They're probably looking for a little bit more than banning chokeholds at this point, especially since you have areas around the country where they are banned and they are still used and people die from them and the cops get away with it. So a ban, like if the unions can still do all of the things they do, a ban doesn't reassure me that it's going to stop people from being choked out on the streets.
Absolutely. I think that's the main point. Look, police reform in any way, shape, or form is difficult. And these things are absolutely reforms that should be lifted up and passed. But yesterday, 10 years ago, these are no-brainers. And I think you're seeing this new movement who has joined a movement that's already been there, is not content with just some of these really, really toothless reforms. They want bigger than that. And they know we're not stupid, right? We understand that police unions do funnel a whole lot of money into city councils, and then city councils, hey, they approve giant budgets for them.
Yeah.
We also know that unless you're taking away these cops' toys, then we're still going to be brutalized by them, right? What I do think is good is that if there are consequences, they can be examples, and I think that is really important. So yes, if you have to report a use of force to the Justice Department, that's huge. If you have to not just shuffle around police officers who are charged with misconduct, that's huge. But there's so much more that can be done. And I think following the money is really, really part of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you mention the toys, I mean, there's a lot of aspects to that, obviously. But like, isn't it weird how it's been weeks of protests. The cops have been firing off tear gas and pepper balls and all that stuff. And I haven't heard of one report of like a police department saying, we've run out of tear gas. Like, how much did we run out of as a country over the past few months? But so far, they've been fine with their munitions, basically. They seem to have pretty good stockpiles.
It's also just so cruel. I'm sorry. Do you know what tear gas does? You're just like dripping. I'll talk about droplets dripping from your mouth and your nose and your eyes. I mean, it is everything. It feels like it's stinging you. Even when you're 3 blocks away, you can start to feel it. I think people who've got allergies, who are just in the vicinity of tear gas, can feel it. Like, we're in a pandemic and you're tear gassing people? Yeah. Really?
100%. Yeah. As I've mentioned on the show, my co-host of True North, the docuseries I did, covering protests in Palestine, some tear gas got trapped under her contact lens and she lost some of the vision in her eye permanently as a result of it. That's what happens. So sort of to this effect, a little bit more of what's in it. The package would mandate the use of body cameras nationwide, which I will just say, I would have imagined at the beginning years ago that would have solved a lot more of the problem. Let's acknowledge it does not. Like, it provides us a window into what happens, but cops very often turn them off. They don't seem to face consequences when they turn them off. And simply seeing what happens for many Americans on juries and things like that, they don't care. So it provides more of a window into what's going on, but clearly not a solution by itself. But that bill would also ban military-style weapons for police. I would like to see a list of what that includes and what that does not include.
See, that is very, very key. I mean, if we're banning military weapons for police, let's also ban them for civilians. I mean, I'm just trying to link, once again, we need to demilitarize our whole society. But of course, police have a special responsibility to not brutalize us. Yeah. I think that's a start. I also would like to see I would like to see a lot more changes that are way more fundamental, like you aren't allowed to say that you feared for your life. Mm-hmm. Because we know that whenever a police officer uses force, they can say that they feared for their lives. But like, that could apply to literally anything. And again, back to the implicit bias, like that will go a little bit far. But you can say you feared for your life. I mean, it's a dangerous job. You're constantly afraid for your life, potentially.
Yeah, we live in a country of a lot of really scared people. Some of them cops use it on the job, and then a lot of the stand your ground is just people putting themselves into positions to say, hey, I was scared, I had to shoot this person, even though they put themselves in that position. So they weren't scared when they grabbed the gun and ran to the place, but once they got there, gripped by fear. Finally, in the bill, it also includes a version of the bill we've been talking about recently that makes lynching a federal hate crime that Rand Paul has such a problem with. And I also saw, I mean, there's like press conferences going on. That'll come out. We'll talk about it on tomorrow's show. Pelosi asked about the push to defund the police, notes that police have to deal with various mental health and education issues that go beyond their purview, and said, quote, we could rebalance some of our funding to address those issues more directly. So here's the thing.
Wow.
Some of these changes are perfectly, I'll believe it when I see it. Some of the changes are perfectly fine, sure, but the goal here should not be, and by the way, isn't, so good luck trying to just take this bill and assume that that's going to end all this, to take like a couple of like things around the edges of the police and tweak them a bit and provide some new limitations. That is not going to change the fundamental problems because the problems are fundamental. I think personally, we should do what John Oliver profiled one example of this, and I think Camden, New Jersey, where they dissolved the police force, which supposedly Minneapolis is thinking about doing, and then restarted it from scratch, requiring everyone to be rehired and fundamentally changing the mission of the police. I think that should be the goal. But at the very least, even if you're not going to go through that process, we should be engaged in a nationwide rethinking of the scope and nature of law enforcement. That it does not have to be involved in every aspect of people's lives, that having it involved in every aspect of people's lives multiplies many times over the amount of violence that will be meted out by the police on the people they're supposed to be protecting and serving. Defund the police, like just in case Tucker Carlson is watching, does not mean we don't have any law enforcement ever and we just live in anarchy, red in tooth and claw. And it doesn't mean that, like what Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson were saying, that just black gangs with guns police the streets. That's not what it means, you racist a-holes. If they would listen for 1 second, they would know. And of course they do know, but they're paid to be lying racists. That's not what it's about. It's about changing the nature of the police, obviously.
Yes. And we're not going to do that if we keep on approving these billion-dollar budgets for unnecessary equipment and unnecessary policing.
Yes.
And I think the real issue is, and I'm sure people have watched 13th. I would suggest you watch it again. But this is part of the prison industrial complex. The police are feeding a private prison industry that needs and wants more and more people in on low-level crimes to make, whatever, uniforms for 2 cents an hour, or fight fires in California for 10 cents an hour, and do all of the other things that basically this now new slavery and new Jim Crow has allowed us to do, which is the prison industrial complex. So we need to go after that. I think it was a huge victory this week. I believe it was outside of Atlanta when $23 million expansion to a prison was denied. Nice. Those are the kinds of fights that we should absolutely be looking at and celebrating. We need to ratchet down, not ramp up prisons.
Yeah, 100%. There should not be any profit. No one should be making money off of this. Okay? It's not a good thing to lock people up. We should not have a financial interest in doing it. So obviously, yeah, the private prison should be entirely outlawed. There seems to be some good moves being made in the New York area, but that should be nationwide. Yeah, fundamentally, law enforcement, not just the cops, but including the cops, should be reformed, have to be reformed, and this is the best chance, the best opening or window that we've seen in a long time. For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report, and you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.